New Jersey Network is pleased to bring you The Home Whovian. I'm Eric Luskin. In the next half hour, you'll be visiting with John Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, and Colin Baker. But we begin with the show's soft-spoken producer, John Nathan Turner, clad in his trademark, a Hawaiian shirt.
Well, after a fairly short career at the theatre, I wanted to be an actor, and it took me just 3 very short years to realise I was not very good. I then drifted into the BBC initially as a call boy, and I worked my way up from floor assistant, which is what call boy is called in the BBC, all through every production job: assistant floor manager, production unit manager. And I was then asked, literally, would you like to take over producing Doctor Who? It was something I'd been campaigning for a long time, to produce anything. You know, it had been an ambition of mine. And I must admit that when I was asked to take over Doctor Who, obviously the answer was immediately yes, but there was a fairly daunting aspect to it, that a show of that size, of that magnitude, and the sheer number of years it had been running was a very daunting prospect, combined with the fact that the way the show is made is the most complex show that the BBC makes. So as a first-time producer, it was a fairly substantial challenge, although I didn't stop long enough to say no.
Who are your favorite characters? And have you had a part in shaping those more toward your liking that have made them more special to you?
Well, I have a great fondness for the Master, because when I took over the show, the Master had been reduced to a kind of decrepit heap at the end of his final regeneration. And I think the character, which I believe was devised by Terence and Barry Letts initially, way back when, and then there was the sad death of Roger Delgado, who played the first Master, and I was determined to bring him back. So because I brought him back with this new process of taking over somebody else's body, and then developed him, and I've done at least one Master story every year, I have a tremendous fondness for the Master. After that, I think my main fondness is for the companions that I've devised, like the current one, Perry, Tegan, Adric, Turlough. Inevitably something that you start with a blank sheet of paper and draw a character sketch, then cast, and then see come to fruition. We are thrilled to bits that America loves us, that Australia loves us, and New Zealand and Canada. We're absolutely thrilled, of course we are, because financially it benefits our organisation. In no way do we try and pander to any market. And if you're about to say, what about the latest companion being American, my answer to that is that, if anything, I suspect that could do damage to our popularity out here, because I think it's the very Britishness of the show that is so popular. The show has been extremely successful in some areas, innovatively, and less successful in others. We have played with new technology because there is always a tendency within the kind of science fiction world of television to let Doctor Who play with it first. Sometimes we're successful, as I say, sometimes we're not. But we've never been a show that's been about special effects. It's always been a kind of narrative line about the Doctor and his sidekicks and the culture that they happen to be dealing with. And consequently, unlike some movies that I won't name, that spend millions and millions of dollars and have somewhere in it a 20-minute space battle that is brilliantly shot and brilliantly executed effects-wise, our show has never relied on special effects. They're an adjunct to it. And I'm particularly proud of what we do achieve, bearing in mind our budget, bearing in mind the time we have to do it. Inevitably, there are things that one would love to do again, or to spend 5 times the money on to make them better. What we're trying to do is produce a show that is popular, that is a good science fiction adventure series. End of story. That is our aim. And that's what we do. And so far we've been tremendously successful. Well, I've just written a book about my impressions and my feelings about the 6 Doctors and the 6 actors who played the Doctor. I've now worked with them all apart from Bill Hartnell, the first. And what strikes me when you sit down to write something like that is the sheer individuality of the 6 individuals. Now, there's no reason why they should be alike, but you would expect to find, when you examine closely, a lot of similarities. Their only similarity, I found, is their talent. They're all good actors. And, you know, I'm often asked, do you prefer working with Tom to Peter? Do you prefer working with Colin to Patrick? There isn't an answer to it, because you can't compare 6 very different people. As I say, their only common denominator, if you like, is their talent.
People were very good to me. My producers were very good to me. They gave me very free rein, which I didn't anticipate. I didn't expect that I'd get such free rein. I thought I was going to be held back. Thank the Lord, the original producer who'd suggested me to take the role left. Almost immediately I arrived, and his intention was that I should be what I was like in the lighter side of my profession, which is when I was working in vaudeville, or is that what you call it?
Vaudeville.
We call it music hall in variety. And I was working as a stand-up comic, and I used to play the guitar, and I satirized folk music, and I tumbled and fell about. And he evidently wanted me to play Doctor Who like that, presumably because Pat had been a bit of a musical clown, and he thought this would be a nice little go on from that. But I didn't want to do anything like that at all. Once I'd given up music hall, I wanted to go back to being an actor. So I was very pleased, in fact, when Barry Letts took over, and I was able to play it the way that I wanted to, under Barry's wing. He was, I say, very understanding, because he let me have free rein to my love of gadgetry and clothing, of course. The dress idea was mine. And as soon as I saw a gadget of any sort at all, something new in the motor show or the boat show, I'd ring up Barry and say, I found a marvellous motorcycle that folds up into a briefcase. And he'd say, oh, terrific, you know, we'll have it in Doctor Who, and we did. I'm bad news to producers, because I like shooting on location.
What is it about locations that you like?
Much more freedom. I hate being closed in studios. I much like to get out and get the atmosphere of the place. Better photographically, too, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Particularly with Doctor Who, where you're fighting a budget problem all the time. You know, if you go and you see a set, and there's a cave, and all the lovely rocks of the cave come down to the studio floor, and there's a 90-degree angle. What is that? 90? Yes. And I used to go berserk on this and say, for Christ's sake, can't we put something to round it off at the bottom? And when have you ever been through a tunnel that's got a 90-degree angle from the edges? Can't we put some sand or earth? Oh, that costs money. So I'd therefore much rather be outside, where you know, where the location speaks for itself. There was a lovely story in that. And when I was up in the mountains in Bessie, the lighting cameraman said to Liz Sladen, Liz, would you mind for a moment smacking John on the face? And she said, yes, I'd mind very much. I'm very fond of him. He says, no, it's nothing to do with the hate or nothing, but he's blue. And could you get some life, some blood flowing through his face? And we were absolutely blue with the cold.
Talk Daleks a little bit.
They were my unfavorite. I hated Daleks.
You're not the only one who's... Tom Baker said that, too.
Did he?
Yeah.
I think they're the most ridiculous things.
Why'd you hate them?
Well, I mean, for a start, they look as if they're made of a lot of tennis balls stuck on a bit of 3-ply. I never liked the way they looked. The Terry Nations had some private ones, which were in very good nick. They looked good. You also saw the twinkling feet of the operators from time to time, under the skirts, little feet going along, working them. And of course, they were supposed to be the most evil beings on Earth, or at least they weren't beings. Of course, they were only encasements for a being inside. But they were the most intelligent beings. It didn't strike me they were that intelligent, because you only had to run down a flight of 3 steps, you had them screwed. Because they couldn't go downstairs. No, my favourites were with the advent of the half mask. I think that's when monsters really came into their own, once we started using half mask. Once you can use the expression of the human eye and the mouth and the lips, then you can do anything. And the Ogrons were the first we had, which were very tall ex-boxers, most of them, and stuntmen. And they had, you remember, their very sort of high forehead and long hair, and sort of very spatulate noses, and frightening-looking faces, and they were just half, and they just went over the top of the lip. And then they had a moustache line, which went here, which covered this line, and the human jaw underneath. And, of course, this was a remarkable effect, because you saw the expression of the eye, and the jaw could move. And this was the first time that anything looked right, I think, in the way of a monster that had to speak.
Why was it that you began to feel as though it was time to move on after 5 years?
Well, first of all, Roger Delgado was killed, and Roger was one of my greatest friends, both off and on, and that shook me up very much. Then Barry left, and Barry Letts, to me, was the man that really held Doctor Who together, because not only was he a wonderful director, but a very fine producer, but he was also an ex-actor. So nobody knew the problems better than Barry did. So Barry could see it from the actor's point of view, from the producer's point of view, and, in fact, as we now all know, the writer's point of view, because he wrote some of the best Doctor Who stories ever. And Terence Dix, the script editor, left, and he was another friend. And it looked as if the team was rather breaking up. And I thought, well, that's an era. I'll go now. And so I took a job in a series which was called Who Done It, which was a crime quiz series. And, of course, all the fans thought that it was Doctor Who Done It. And so they carried on watching that.
And I once wrote a letter to the BBC demanding that I be employed. I said that somewhere there was a job for me, and it was disgraceful. And the man had been to a Doctor Who casting session that afternoon. The part just happened to be free. That's the way it happens sometimes. And he had been to a casting session and had no ideas. And my letter demanding employment was the last letter he read as he was getting into bed. Now, here is a coincidence. I actually knew his wife quite well. But no, please, no. I don't mean in the biblical sense. I was acquainted with his wife. I mean, we had sometimes held hands in various canteens. Actors are rather extravagant about those sort of things. And he was getting into bed, and he conscientiously read his last letter with a terrifying sigh, she said, and said, oh, bloody Tom Baker demanding employment. And she said, oh, really? I thought he was doing rather grand things. She said, no, he says, here, we've got to give him a... He said, you know, I've just come from a casting session this afternoon for Doctor Who, which Mary Webster, that was his wife's name, said, ring him up now, Bill. And at 11 o'clock, I'm lying on my mattress on the floor, being rather self-consciously bohemian, and feeling tragically sorry for myself, which sometimes can be a rather pleasant sensation. And the phone went, and it said, Bill Slater here, BBC, come and see me tomorrow. And then my life took another change. That's how it happened. I can scarcely believe it myself. And that's the truth. Just imagine if I wanted to elaborate on it. Yes, that's all right. That little boy there. Why did I stop being the doctor? Well, I just thought I did a lot of it, you know. And I thought I really... So I thought, well, you know, I'd like to go on and do something else, give someone else a chance to do it. It was just at a time, I think I tried to be brave. I tried to be brave. Most of the time I'm a frightful coward. But I tried to be brave. I thought, I just began to drag my feet about going to work a bit, and began to find myself not exactly a daggers drawn, but I began to get more and more critical of scripts or ideas, and then I thought I'd better get out of this, and so I gave someone else a go. Yes. Did I like it? Yes. I mean, it was the happiest time of my life, and since last year, that sort of happiness as widened by the accident of coming to the United States. And I kept hoping that the enthusiasm that you have for the program would wash over the areas of the United States, notably Los Angeles, where I might actually work here. And this shouldn't really surprise you, you have much more taste and perception, I think, than the people do in Los Angeles. The difference between American audiences and UK audiences is you are definitely much more extravagant and outgoing and emotional than the British are, who, of course, as you know, would rather be mugged than hugged, and certainly are very, very, very wary about expressing the sort of enthusiasm I experience here. Do I make residuals on the show? Yeah, I understand that I do. I'm not really very familiar with my financial affairs. I am familiar with other sorts of affairs, and I do the very best I can. But financial affairs I know nothing about, but I believe that I am paid residuals, yes. But I didn't want to pry. It would take the spontaneity out of my life.
Did you ever assume you would have so many American fans, especially women, in love with you?
Did I? Well, I could never possibly have assumed that there would be such attention to the program and such kindness to me. I am gratified, and you must understand, of course, I get all the benefit of your attention and often your affection and kindness when I was at the front. I mean, there was a backup team, but however, I am perfectly willing to not name them and take all the credit. So selfish I am. No, I didn't dream of it. However, I must say, and this is a sort of business point, while I may know nothing about financial affairs, I am acutely aware, from my point of view, of how valuable and important the audience is to me. I have an existence only in proportion to the number of people in this room who will watch me or respond to me or come and see me or be pleased with me. I have no existence without you. And so, yes, you're important to me.
First of all, I had no idea what I was going to do, because it seemed to me that I couldn't do it. Every actor, when he's offered a big part of it, I'm sure, always thinks they can't do it. So I tried to draw on really the first two Doctors, mainly. A bit of John Pertwee, but really not Tom Baker, because I think he'd been so recent, and I guess, did feel that he would sort of take care of himself. But I wanted to bring bits of William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton into it, so they're the people that I based it mainly on. I love the kind of vulnerable quality that Patrick Troughton had, especially, which I wanted to try and get into it. But apart from that, you start off with kind of a few basics, and then hope that the thing grows. To a certain extent, you start off, if you like, blandly, because you have to commit yourself from day one, so you can't be too definite about what you're going to do, I don't think. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with it, or you're going to have to make a very big about turn if you decide that this is not the right direction. So I always start off in a fairly kind of bland way with a few basics that I'm sure about, and then let it grow from that. I feel quite strongly about Doctor Who, but not necessarily from the actor's point of view. I mean, I think as an acting experience, it is a fairly frustrating experience. But I did build up very definite ideas about just about what Doctor Who should be like, and the direction Doctor Who should take. And I felt like trying to write, I think most people who work on Doctor Who feel like they want to write a story, a Doctor Who story. I mean, most of the fans do as well. So it developed really into something that was not about the acting part of being in Doctor Who, but about the whole phenomena of it. I feel kind of like I would like to have something more to do with Doctor Who, but not necessarily as an actor. With most other jobs, you enjoy them as an acting experience. And that's it. You don't have any designs beyond that. But I think there's enormous scope in Doctor Who. I personally, having worked on the programme for 3 years, don't think that realistically there is a bigger role for assistants. I mean, I think that the job of the assistant, if you like, is to say, what is it, Doctor, help Doctor, and for the Doctor to get them out of trouble.
It was tried several times in my time as Doctor Who to have more interesting assistants. It was one thing that John wanted to bring in more. We had Tegan, who was very aggressive, you know, very blunt, didn't get on particularly well with the Doctor. We had Turlough, who was plain bad. He wanted to kill the Doctor. Despite that, I think the assistant that worked best was Nyssa, from my point of view, who was just simply the simplest assistant. She was a nice person, and she was bright. There's nothing wrong with it. They don't have to be stupid. But I do think that their job in Doctor Who is to get into trouble, if you like, and for the Doctor to get them out. So it's very difficult to put your finger on an anecdote. I often think to myself, before I do these interviews or conventions, I should actually sit down and go through all the stories that I can remember and think of funny anecdotes. I mean, I remember things like falling through the set when I was meant to be very efficiently, you know, unlocking a door. But funny things happen all the time, but they're not, I just feel that they're not kind of relatable things, you know. People often say to me, they're not how, you know, they expected me to be, that I am like an ordinary person, if you like. And I never know if that's meant as a compliment or actually an insult, in that whether they would actually prefer me to be like a star, like somebody who is on the television, who is you know, Doctor Who, or whether they're quite pleased about me being an ordinary person. I feel in a way that I'm sort of letting them down by actually being me. That may just be paranoia. I mean, I remember that the first few conventions I did, I always used to come in the costume, because I felt that that's the only bit that they would be pleased to see, because I would be letting them down terribly if I was just me. Now I feel, as I've left the series anyway, that I really can't come in the costume, and that it's much better for me to just, you know, come as I am. Bizarre though it may be. So I don't know, that's the misconception, that's the problem. You never know quite to actually live up to what they think you will be is a good thing, or whether you should just come over as yourself.
To put the story a little bit into context, I played a smallish part in an episode of Peter Davison's second season, a story called Arc of Infinity, in which I played a guy called Maxil, who was the chief of security on Gallifrey, which, as you probably know, is the Doctor's home planet. And the Doctor went back to Gallifrey, having been summoned by the Time Lords. I arrested him in a brutal fashion by shooting him, carted him off, where he was then executed, again by me, in the character of Maxil. So there's a lot of speculation around that, in fact, I acquired the part by doing grievous bodily harm to Peter Davison. That was not in my mind at the time, it has to be said. As a result of that, I met John Nathan Turner, who was and is the producer of Doctor Who. I think that he couldn't believe that I was playing the part of Maxil in the way I was playing it. Basically, it was a smallish, unimportant character, and I played it as if it was the most important role ever been written for television. In other words, I went right over the top. So I think it was that quality which he sensed might be suitable for the Doctor to replace Peter Davison. And when Peter said he was leaving, John rang me up and asked me to come and see him and told me that's what it was about. He tells me, and I'm very flattered, that I was the only person that he was considering, and he wouldn't have started considering anybody else until we had been through whatever process we had to go through to decide whether I wanted to do it or not. During that period between him first suggesting that he thought I might be suitable to play the part and him subsequently offering it to me, there were a period of about 4 or 5 weeks where I went away with some old tapes of all my predecessors, not with any intention of copying what they were doing, but just so that I could almost subliminally assimilate whatever quality it is that is common to all of the Doctors. And there are various essentials which are the Doctor. Not that I could write them down in a list, but you sort of get to feel it after a while. And then I came to meet with John and the script editor and the head of the series department of the BBC, and we discussed the way, in general terms, I thought I would like to play the part. And they said what they saw in me that made them think of me as being suitable. And it turned out that we were, I mean, within very narrow margins in total agreement. So then the writers were briefed to write the stories, and we just took off from there. I mean, there were characteristics which I wanted to enhance. There have always been there. I mean, I wanted my Doctor to be, for instance, arrogant. Not in a deeply unpleasant way, but to be quite strong on arrogance, wit. I wanted to be fairly active, in the same way that Pertwee was a very active physical doctor. I wanted that. I wanted the occasional tetchiness of Hartnell, some of the off-the-wall kind of offbeat stuff that Troughton produced, the honesty of Peter Davison, and little bits drawn from all the doctors, plus, I hope, a large amount of something original from myself. I had heard about the degree of devotion of the fans here, so I was prepared. I was also surprised by its fervour. I mean, obviously not every person in America has heard of Doctor Who, or if they've heard of it, maybe they don't all watch it. But the people who do watch it seem to be 1,000% fans of the programme. And it's a different kind of fandom than it is in Britain, because it's more powerful, but it's, in a sense, more loving. I find over here that the fans are fans of the programme and therefore don't want to knock it as much. In England, some of the fans are very critical, and they hate it if it deviates to the slightest degree from their preconceived ideas about how it should be. Over here, it's a warm fandom. I mean, I'm constantly embarrassed by the shower of gifts that I receive. Wonderful things that the fans make. I mean, it's a joy to know that the programme that we're involved with brings so much pleasure that fans want to reciprocate by giving gifts like that. I never get the chance to thank everybody properly, but it's very heartwarming. I mean, how many jobs do people do where you get that kind of feedback? I did an interview for a British national paper recently, and they asked me if I had any ambitions unassociated with my profession. And I said, yes, I would love to fly the space shuttle. But you've just worried me, because if it involves keeping fit, I think I've got trouble. I mean, I keep fit enough for my work, but I don't think I'd pass any kind of fitness test that would be required to withstand the kind of G-forces involved in all that, but I'd love to do it. I have this desire to be off this planet and see it, because it's had an extraordinary effect on a lot of people. I mean, if you think of all the astronauts over the last 20 years and what's happened to them since, I mean, they've radically altered their lives, a lot of them. Maybe I don't want to radically alter my life, so I shouldn't, but because I quite like my life as it is. But I would love to see that green-blue ball in the sky.